Jon had always loved the mountains. The quiet, the isolation, and the fresh air were a balm for his restless spirit. It was during one of his summer excursions that he found himself deep in the lush woods of the Black Ridge Mountains, accompanied by his loyal German shepherd Max. The bond between man and dog was unshakable. They were more than companions. They were a team. As the sun dipped behind the towering peaks and the sky blushed with hues of orange and purple, Jon decided it was time to head back to their campsite. But Max, usually obedient and aware of their routine, was behaving strangely. His ears perked up, his body tensed, and before Jon could call him, Max took off barking into the dense thicket. "Max, come back!" Jon called, worry flaring in his chest. But Max didn't pause. He bolted through the underbrush with an urgency Jon had never seen before. With his heart pounding and adrenaline surging, Jon followed, pushing past twisted roots and low-hanging branches that tugged at his clothes. The forest thickened, and soon they arrived at the mouth of a cave, hidden beneath the shadow of ancient oaks. Max stood at the entrance, barking furiously as if trying to communicate a dire warning. Jon felt a chill run down his spine. The cave was dark, wide, and emanated an air of foreboding. He shone his flashlight inside, its beam cutting through the heavy darkness. The walls glistened with moisture, and an odd, almost metallic scent filled the air. "Max, what is it, boy?" he whispered, inching closer. Max growled low in his throat, eyes locked on the darkness inside. Reluctantly, Jon stepped into the cave, the sound of dripping water echoing around him. His footsteps disturbed the silence, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots only adding to the eerie atmosphere. As he ventured further, the light revealed strange carvings etched into the walls, symbols that seemed older than time itself. His pulse quickened when he realized these were not mere cave markings, but intricate inscriptions, depicting scenes of figures bowing before a towering shadow. The barking had stopped. Jon spun around to see Max standing still, ears flat against his head. Before Jon could move, a sudden rush of wind swept through the cave, extinguishing the flashlight beam and plunging them into darkness. "Do you want me to continue with the suspenseful revelation and the shocking discovery Jon makes in the cave?" Jon froze, his senses heightened, straining to hear any sign of movement. He reached into his backpack, fumbling for a spare flashlight, and finally managed to switch it on. The beam flickered to life, casting long shadows along the jagged walls. Max stood rigid, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and focus, as though something unseen was stirring within the cave. Jon's hand tightened around the flashlight, and he took a cautious step forward. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the air, coming from the deeper recesses of the cave. Max's hackles rose, and he began to bark frantically, but his voice now seemed strained, as if fighting against some unseen force. "What's wrong, boy?" Jon whispered, heart racing. He had never seen Max like this before. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Jon pressed on, moving further into the cave. The temperature seemed to drop as he advanced, and his breath came out in visible clouds. His flashlight revealed a narrow passageway ahead, and the markings on the walls became even more intricate, almost hypnotic in their patterns. At the end of the passage, Jon could see an altar-like structure. It was a crude stone table covered with ancient, worn parchments. Some kind of ornate mask lay beside it, glowing faintly in the light. Max stopped barking, his gaze fixed on the mask, as if he understood its significance. Jon approached slowly, his fingers trembling as he reached out to touch one of the parchments. The paper was brittle, ancient. His heart skipped a beat as he deciphered the symbols written in an archaic language that looked like nothing he had ever seen before. His eyes scanned the text frantically, piecing together the meaning. It spoke of an ancient ritual, a binding, and a creature locked away in the heart of the cave, an entity born from the shadows, waiting for the day it would be freed. Jon's throat went dry as he read aloud one of the lines. "Only a true companion can unlock what lies within." Max growled again, but this time it sounded less like fear and more like warning. John's mind raced. Was the creature mentioned in these texts the same one that Max was sensing? Was it something that had been trapped here for centuries, waiting for the right moment to escape? A sudden realization hit him. The inscriptions weren't just warnings. They were a record of something far older than civilization itself, something that had been sealed away for a reason. And now, it seemed like that ancient power had been awakened. John's flashlight flickered again. The air grew thicker, heavier, as though the very atmosphere in the cave was becoming alive, suffocating him. He backed away from the altar, his mind spinning. And then it happened. The ground beneath him trembled. The walls shuddered as a low rumble filled the air. The mask on the stone table began to vibrate, its edges glowing brighter with an unnatural light. Max, standing at the cave entrance, barked fiercely, a wild, desperate sound that seemed to reverberate off the very walls. John's eyes widened in terror as the cave around him began to shift. The rocks groaned and cracked, and he felt an unmistakable, chilling presence. Something was awakening. Max lunged toward him, pulling at the leash as if trying to drag John away. But John stood frozen, unable to tear his gaze away from the growing, pulsing light emanating from the mask. Then, the cave fell silent. A cold gust of wind rushed through, extinguishing John's flashlight once more. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his heart pounding in his chest. Max's barks had stopped, and in that terrifying silence, John realized something was terribly wrong. He could feel it in the air. The presence that had been bound here for so long was now free. The entity was closer than ever. The darkness around him seemed to press in, suffocating. A low whisper echoed through the cave, a voice that seemed both ancient and malevolent. "You should not have come," it hissed. John's pulse raced as he tried to stand, but his legs felt like jelly. He had to get out. He had to leave before it was too late. But before he could move, a cold, unseen hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him back. He gasped, his breath coming in short bursts. The voice grew louder, more distinct, as though it was circling him. "Your dog, your companion. It cannot save you now." Max suddenly sprang into action, barking louder than ever before. But it wasn't just a bark. It was a fierce, commanding sound, as though Max was fighting something invisible, something John couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of his being. "Max! Max!" John shouted, trying to stand, but the unseen force had a grip on him, and he couldn't break free. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the darkness seemed to pulse around them. Max's barking intensified, now a frenzied, desperate sound, and John realized Max wasn't just barking at the unseen entity. He was calling out, warning John, protecting him. The bond between them was more powerful than anything John had ever known. With every ounce of strength left, John grabbed Max's collar and pulled himself up, trying to steady himself as the ground quaked beneath their feet. The whispering voice continued, but now it was more of a distant hum, drowned out by Max's commanding barks. John took a deep breath. He had to leave. He had to get out of this cave, or they wouldn't make it. As if in response to his determination, Max tore forward, pulling John with him toward the exit. The air grew lighter as they neared the mouth of the cave, the oppressive force slowly retreating behind them. The darkness seemed to recede, and John, heart pounding, stepped into the open air, Max by his side. As the moonlight bathed the entrance to the cave, John looked back. The cave was silent now still, but John knew that something had been set free. Something ancient and dangerous, and they had barely escaped. Let me know if you'd like to continue or make adjustments. As John and Max stumbled out of the cave, the cool night air filled their lungs, a sharp contrast to the suffocating, musty air of the cave. The first few breaths felt like a lifeline, each one a victory. Max's steady, panting breath at his side was a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. John fell to his knees, exhaustion seeping into every muscle. His hand gripped Max's fur, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He could only breathe in deeply, feeling the weight of what they had just survived. Max nuzzled his face against John's arm, as though trying to comfort him, but it was John who needed comfort. Max had saved him. Max had known something he hadn't. "I'm sorry, boy," John whispered, tears filling his eyes. "I never should have dragged you into that place." Max's eyes met his, steady and wise beyond words. John had always known that Max was special, but now he understood the depth of that bond. It was more than companionship. It was a silent promise of loyalty, a connection that transcended any fear, any darkness. For a long moment, John just sat there, letting the weight of the cave's mystery sink in. They had escaped, yes, but the danger wasn't over. The entity, whatever it was still out there waiting. John had no idea if it was truly bound forever or if it would find a way back. The uncertainty gnawed at him. But for now, there was only the comfort of the night sky above him, the soft rustling of the trees, and the steady presence of Max at his side. "Max," John murmured, looking at the dog who had been both a protector and a guide. "I don't know what happened in there, but I know you saved us." "You always do." Max let out a soft whine, as though understanding every word, before he leaned his head into John's lap. The dog's calmness grounded John in a way nothing else could. But the questions remained, lingering like the shadows of the cave. What had they truly faced? What had been sealed away in that dark place for centuries? John's mind raced, the whispers still echoing in his ears. He thought about the ancient inscriptions on the walls, the chilling presence that had nearly consumed them both. He thought about the bond he and Max shared, a bond that had proven to be their greatest weapon. Max lifted his head and looked into the distance, his ears pricked. He seemed to sense something that John couldn't. A sudden dread washed over him as he realized that the night, though peaceful for now, had not yet offered them any real safety. "We can't go back," John said softly, standing up, his voice low with resolve. "We can't let anyone else walk into that cave. The world isn't ready for whatever was down there." Max's tail gave a slight wag, as though he agreed. They had come close to losing everything, and the idea of returning to that place was unthinkable. But as John started to turn away, the weight of his promise hung heavy in his heart. But Max stopped him, tugging lightly on his leash, pulling him toward the woods. The dog's instincts were sharp, always guiding them, always leading them. He knew they couldn't leave the mystery unsolved. There was more to the story, more to uncover, but for now, they would leave the cave behind, together. John looked down at his dog, seeing not just the loyal companion who had saved his life, but the protector of their future. He took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in his throat. "This isn't over, is it?" John said, his voice hoarse. Max responded by nudging his leg with his nose, as if to say, "Not yet." Together, they turned back toward their camp, the night no longer quiet, but filled with a sense of dread and purpose. John couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. But no matter what came next, he knew one thing for certain. Max would always be by his side. And with that unspoken promise, John finally allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. As they made their way through the woods, John looked up at the sky. The stars were still shining brightly, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he and Max were meant to face whatever came next together. And that, in the end, was the most powerful force of all. The end.